Best practices for REMS implementation. Elements to assure safe use. Impact on utilization management strategies. What should pharmaceutical manufacturers keep in mind as they work to launch or optimize their REMS programs? What impact can a successful REMS program have on a product's viability? Join us to find out. In the Know starts now. Hello and welcome to In the Know, your source for insight and analysis on the issues that matter to specialty pharma. I'm your host, Gina Clark. Today, we turn our attention to risk evaluation and mitigation strategies and the importance they have in the future of several specialty pharmaceutical products. We'll examine the evolving FDA requirements, manufacturer preparedness for these changes, and the effect REMS might have on appropriate access to products. Joining us today is Peyton Howell, President for AmerisourceBergen Consulting Services, as well as Terri Madison, Vice President for Xcenda, and the leader of the company's epidemiology and risk management consulting practice. Thanks to both of you for being with us today.
Thank you, Gina.
Thanks, Gina. It's a pleasure to be here.
When REMS were first mentioned as replacement programs for the old GRIS maps, there was quite a bit of anxiety in the pharma community about what that might entail. To a certain degree, it seems like the requirements have not been as stringent as many manufacturers feared. So was this much ado about nothing, or are there still areas related to REMS that pharma needs to watch closely?
I do think the observation that a lot of manufacturers were concerned that REMS would be more stringent is definitely borne out with our consulting experience. We've worked with several customers who have actually submitted draft REMS proposals that have ended up being much more stringent than what the FDA ultimately approved for their products. However, saying that, I do think that there are a few trends that we do need to keep our eyes on. The first one is that big difference between REMS and risk maps is that REMS require formal assessments. And it's, simple assessments of the effectiveness of the communication materials, as well as more formal assessments of is the REMS achieving its desired objective in minimizing the safety issues of concern. So I think as we start to see those REMS assessments come in, the first wave should be coming in sometime this year. We'll probably see some changes in the future REMS requirements as FDA incorporates those learnings into their future requirements.
Yeah, and related to that, one important piece too is the fact that right now these REMS really are different for each product. And so I think that's created a lot of anxiety for manufacturers because products could be very similar in their needs, but the products feel different to the manufacturer. It's kind of like starting from scratch, but they also feel very different for patients and prescribers.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think right now there's very few class-wide REMS out there. Although if you actually look at the REMS that are approved, there's several products that are not officially on a class-wide REMS, but actually appear to be a class-wide REMS. A great example would be the fluoroquinolones, where there's over 6 out there on the market, all with REMS to look at Achilles tendon rupture, but they're not considered a class-wide REMS. So I think more and more as we start to see some standardization in there, that's definitely something the provider community has been asking for.
Yeah, standardization is definitely an opportunity.
How will manufacturers and regulatory organizations like the FDA measure the effectiveness of REMS programs? What does success look like from program to program?
So there's certainly with the REMS requirements these formal assessments that are required. And these assessments can vary from a simple survey that assesses a patient's receipt of and understanding of a medication guide to very formal pharmacoepidemiologic studies that look at the effectiveness of the actual REMS in achieving its desired objectives in reducing the incidence of certain adverse events. I think that as we move forward, again, with these REMS assessments, the data that's going to come out of those is going to drive future decisions for FDA requirements.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we might see the REMS change and evolve after this first kind of load of assessments comes through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's focus on those REMS programs that do require elements to assure safe use. What does this entail?
So the elements to assure safe use are described over several pages of the REMS guidance that's out there. But in essence, the elements fall into 3 basic categories. The first is that healthcare providers, in particular prescribers, have had some special training or certification before they can prescribe a product. The second is that a product may only be used in certain healthcare settings. So for example, if there was a concern about anaphylaxis, the prescription may only be administered in a setting that can treat a patient if there is an anaphylactic reaction. I think the third area is looking at patients and in particular documenting that patients are eligible to receive a certain product and that they've got certain safe use conditions present. So whether that be laboratory monitoring or a negative pregnancy test, those are the different elements to assure safe use, or ETASUs.
And one concern we have about elements to assure safe use from a supply chain perspective is that they're often oriented towards that prescriber setting, which then can lead to really requirements of a more restricted distribution or other types of systems for accessing the product. And that's a concern, because is there an option to consider looking at either the prescriber or the site so that we don't add new costs into the system unless it's absolutely necessary from a safety perspective?
Right. So from what you've seen, how prepared are manufacturers when it comes to implementing these elements? How much of an impact might ETASUs have on a product's success, either positive or negative, depending on the manufacturer's level of preparedness?
I think most manufacturers are very well prepared to deal with the more simple REMS, those REMS that require just a medication guide or communication practices out to healthcare providers that might prescribe. However, when it comes to the more restricted distributions and the patient registries, our experience has been they're not very well prepared. In fact, a lot of the companies, whether it's a large company or a startup company, are coming to look for service providers to help them, especially because they've not been very well integrated in the actual day-to-day supply chain of distribution and drug administration.
And Terry's being humble. She's been extremely busy. I mean, it's been a really challenging time when sometimes the manufacturers are moving forward and thought they were prepared for a REMS, but then got different guidance, sometimes a less restricted REMS, and then need to be prepared in a different way. So it's been a very, very busy opportunity for her consulting practice, but I think manufacturers are trying to respond, to this new environment in a positive way.
Yeah, I think another component with the elements to assure safe use is people are a lot of the time focused on the negatives of a restricted distribution, but if you look at a product like Terri that has a very restricted distribution in a hospital, that product probably wouldn't have been approved without a REMS. So here's a case where the REMS actually does an excellent job with minimizing the risk to those patients, and a product's out there on the market for patients that need it that probably otherwise would not have been approved.
Oh, that's right. Excellent point.
Right. And some of the REMS we work on, there's an opportunity to build other services around that REMS, or at least do it in a conducive way so that you're not adding on what feels like a lot of additional burden onto healthcare providers, be that hospitals or physicians and their staff.
In early May, the FDA announced that REMS for opioid products are in the final stages of development and could be ready this summer. How might this affect how these products are prescribed? And for the companies that make these products, what plans of action could they be deploying right now to address this?
So the opioids are interesting because there was actually supposed to be a class-wide REMS issued last October. And there was a huge outcry from stakeholders, predominantly patient advocacy groups and prescribers, to say we need to think about this. And what is the ETASU in terms of registration and restricted access going to do in order to allow us to give these products to our patients without disrupting our relationship with these patients and their confidentiality. So what's been going on for the last year is the FDA has been getting a lot of stakeholder feedback, especially from the patient advocacy groups and the prescribers, so that they have a better idea of how to implement the elements to assure safe use without disrupting that beneficial access to patients who do need opioids, for example, for cancer pain management.
And the cancer patients are a real concern of ours. So AmerisourceBergen actually was on a recent steering committee as part of NCCN, and both Terry and I were actually at that meeting just a week ago, and it's a palpable level of concern in terms of implementing that classified REMS and its impact for cancer patients, which is so different than all of the other patients that would utilize those types of treatments, and what type of flexibility will be available.
Right.
Yeah, I think the key is really going to be with a lot of REMS, but in particular with the opioids, to get that stakeholder feedback and make sure that whatever the final program looks like, that it's not creating unnecessary barriers.
Right. So we may not see anything on this for a little bit. Yeah. I mean, although it's expected this summer, it could be later. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think the official plan is by next October. There was a delay of 12 months. So.